The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, a sea of reporters, legal analysts, and curious spectators all craning their necks to get a glimpse of the man at the center of one of the most bizarre legal battles in modern history. Kenji Takahashi, a 32-year-old man of Japanese descent, stood confidently at the plaintiff's table. Across from him sat Judge Marvin Calloway, an imposing black man in his late 60s, who had presided over some of the most complex cases in the state's history. His sharp, discerning eyes studied Kenji with an unreadable expression. His hands folded as he prepared to oversee what would undoubtedly be a legal circus. The case had made national headlines. An Asian man was suing the state for refusing to legally recognize him as black. Kenji's argument was that racial identity is fluid, much like gender identity, and that he should be granted full legal status as an African American. The room buzzed with murmurs as journalists whispered into their microphones, live streaming the events to millions of confused, entertained, and outraged viewers worldwide. Kenji's lawyer, a nervous and overworked public defender named Brian Chambers, was visibly uncomfortable, fidgeting with his tie as he looked through his notes. It was clear he didn't sign up for this case willingly. Meanwhile, the defense attorney, a sharp-witted woman named Angela Whitaker, looked amused yet determined, as if she had been given the easiest case of her career. Judge Calloway cleared his throat, silencing the courtroom. "Mr. Takahashi, you may proceed with your argument," he said in a tone that carried the weight of both authority and disbelief. Kenji stood up, adjusted his do-rag, and pulled out a stack of neatly printed papers, dramatically adjusting his gold-rimmed sunglasses before addressing the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice unnaturally deep, as though he were imitating a rapper. "I come before you today not as Kenji Takahashi, but as a proud black man, unjustly stripped of his true racial identity." The entire courtroom fell silent, the collective pause pregnant with incredulity. Then, a scoff from the defense broke the tension, and Judge Calloway raised an eyebrow but allowed Kenji to continue. "For years, I have lived, spoken, dressed, and vibed as a black man. My spirit aligns with the black struggle, and I have felt more kinship with the black community than I ever did with my biological heritage. My very essence rejects my so-called Asian identity." He paced dramatically, glancing at the spectators as though expecting applause. The court stenographer's fingers hesitated for a second, as if she couldn't believe she was about to record such a statement in a legal transcript. At the defense table, Angela Whitaker folded her arms, shaking her head in disbelief while Judge Calloway leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. "Mr. Takahashi," he said slowly, his voice even but firm, "you are here to argue that racial identity is purely self-determined? That regardless of genetics, cultural background, or lived experience, you should be allowed to choose your race the way one might choose an outfit?" Kenji nodded enthusiastically, snapping his fingers. "Exactly, Your Honor. That's what I've been trying to tell people. Race is a construct. Why should I be bound by the body I was born into? Who's to say my soul isn't black?" A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some were whispering in agreement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. In the back row, a group of elderly black men in suits whispered among themselves, visibly irritated by the absurdity unfolding before them. One of them muttered, "Man, if this fool don't sit down." A younger woman near them, live streaming the case on TikTok, whispered excitedly, "This is the wildest thing I've ever seen. This dude really thinks he can Rachel Dolezal his way into blackness." Judge Calloway took off his glasses, rubbed his temples, and sighed deeply. He had seen plenty of nonsense in his years as a judge, but this was testing his patience. "Mr. Takahashi," he said, his tone now tinged with exhaustion, "let me get this straight. You are asking this court to legally change your racial classification from Asian to black? And you believe that your personal experiences justify this request?" Kenji nodded vigorously, placing a hand over his heart. "Your Honor, I have been black in my heart since I was 10 years old. When I first heard Tupac's Dear Mama, I felt something in my soul shift. When I saw Boys and the Hood for the first time, I wept. I have spent years immersing myself in the culture, the slang, the struggles. I even eat soul food every Sunday. My diet is 80% fried chicken and collard greens." A loud groan erupted from the black spectators. One woman muttered, "Oh, hell no." Judge Calloway stared at Kenji for a long moment, then leaned forward. "So let me get this straight. You claim your diet, music taste, and movie preferences make you black. Kenji hesitated before nodding. I mean, yeah. And my fashion, my speech, my mindset. Blackness is a feeling, Your Honor. Judge Calloway sighed again, longer this time. Mr. Takahashi, do you know what the one-drop rule was? Kenji squinted, looking confused. Yeah, it means if you got even a little black in you, society saw you as black. Judge Calloway nodded. Correct. And yet, you have no drops. Not a single drop. Not one. And you're here telling me that you should be legally recognized as black, despite not experiencing a single hardship that actually comes with being black. Kenji hesitated, opening his mouth but finding himself momentarily at a loss for words. The courtroom erupted in whispers again. Angela Whitaker smirked, flipping through her notes. Your Honor, she said, I think we're about to have a very interesting case on our hands. The tension in the room thickened. This was just the beginning, and everyone knew it. Kenji straightened his oversized hoodie, cleared his throat, and clutched his stack of printed papers like they were the Declaration of Independence, his eyes scanning the courtroom as if he were about to deliver a historical speech. Your Honor, he began, adopting a theatrical tone, I understand that my claim may be unconventional, but I am here today because I believe in the fundamental right of self-identification. Race, like gender, is fluid. It is a social construct, one that I have actively chosen to transcend. He paused dramatically, glancing at the jury as if waiting for nods of approval. Instead, he was met with a mix of confusion, suppressed laughter, and sheer disbelief. Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, his fingers interlocked. Go on, Mr. Takahashi. Let's hear how you arrived at this conclusion. Kenji's face lit up, as if the judge had just handed him a golden microphone. I wasn't born black, sure, but that doesn't mean I didn't grow up black in my heart, he stated with conviction. Ever since I was a kid, I was drawn to black culture in a way I never felt toward my so-called Asian roots. He raised his hands to form air quotes, his voice dripping with disdain at the mention of his heritage. I never cared about anime, I never listened to J-pop, I never did karate, I wasn't into any of that. What I was into was hip-hop, soul food, and the struggle. Angela Whitaker, the defense attorney, cocked an eyebrow. The struggle, she repeated, her voice laced with sarcasm. Kenji nodded furiously, as if she had just validated his entire argument. Yes, exactly. The struggle. I faced hardships too, just like black folks. I grew up in a tough neighborhood. Okay, it was a middle-class suburb, but it had its rough parts. I was the only Asian kid in my friend group, and I always felt like I belonged with them more than I ever did with my own family. He paused for effect, his eyes glistening with exaggerated emotion. I've been called racial slurs. People have looked at me funny when I walk into a room. I know what it feels like to be othered. Judge Calloway exhaled slowly, his patience visibly wearing thin. So let me get this straight, he said. You're telling this court that because you personally identified more with your black peers, that qualifies you to be legally recognized as black? Kenji clapped his hands together. That's exactly what I'm saying. Your Honor, identity isn't about biology, it's about how we feel inside. I've done everything in my power to live as a black man. I dress black, I talk black, I eat black. Hell, I even got waves. At this, one of the jurors let out an involuntary snort. The camera crew recording the trial zoomed in on Kenji's head, revealing that his waves were, in fact, nothing more than hastily applied hair grease on his straight Asian hair, which had done nothing but make it look stringy and wet. A murmur of restrained laughter spread through the audience. Angela couldn't hold back her smirk. Mr. Takahashi, you just said you eat black. Could you clarify what that means? Kenji nodded vigorously, as if the question was serious. Absolutely. I only eat soul food now. Fried chicken, mac and cheese, cornbread, collard greens, you name it. I refuse to eat sushi or ramen because that's not who I am anymore. He shot a proud glance at the judge, as if expecting approval. Judge Calloway massaged his temples. So food determines race now? Kenji shrugged. Culture is a big part of identity, Your Honor. And food is a part of culture. Ergo, my food choices are proof of my blackness. The courtroom groaned in unison. One black woman in the back muttered, "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." A man sitting next to her leaned over and whispered, "He really thinks putting hot sauce on his chicken makes him black." Judge Calloway leaned forward, his face unreadable. "Mr. Takahashi, do you have any black ancestry?" "Any at all." Kenji waved his hand dismissively. "Nah, man, that doesn't matter. Race is a construct, remember? Just like gender. If someone can transition from male to female, why can't I transition from Asian to black?" Angela flipped through her notes and sighed. "Mr. Takahashi, are you aware that race and gender are categorized differently in legal contexts?" Kenji waved her off. "That's just society trying to box us in. I reject those labels. I've lived my truth for years now. I've walked the walk, talked the talk. I even stopped calling myself Kenji and started going by my real name, Tyrone." At that moment, Judge Calloway's gavel slammed down so hard that the stenographer nearly jumped out of her seat. "Excuse me? Your real name?" Kenji grinned, nodding. "That's right. Tyrone Jackson. I legally changed my name last year." Angela stared at him, stunned. "You legally changed your name from Kenji Takahashi to Tyrone Jackson?" Kenji beamed proudly. "Yep. Even got my name embroidered on my do-rag." He pulled it off with a dramatic flourish, revealing the words "Big Tyrone" stitched in gold thread. The courtroom fell into complete chaos. Reporters were whispering frantically, jurors were covering their mouths to suppress laughter, and Judge Calloway simply sat there, staring at Kenji as if he were an unsolvable math equation. Finally, after a long pause, the judge spoke. "Let me get this straight. You legally changed your name to Tyrone Jackson. You reject your actual ancestry. You think eating fried chicken and wearing a do-rag makes you black. And you are now asking the court to formally recognize you as a black man." Kenji nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Finally, someone gets it." Judge Calloway took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and then exhaled. "All right. I've heard enough for today. Ms. Whitaker, be prepared to respond to this claim. We'll reconvene tomorrow." He slammed the gavel down. As the court adjourned, reporters swarmed outside the building, eager to dissect what had just transpired. Social media was already ablaze with reactions, memes, and outrage. Meanwhile, Kenji, or rather, Tyrone, walked out of the courtroom with his head held high, convinced that he had delivered the most powerful speech on identity in modern history. The next day, the courtroom was even more packed than before. News cameras lined the back of the room, and the case had become the biggest trending topic on social media. Hashtag Tyrone Takahashi, hashtag race fluidity, and hashtag Judge Calloway ain't having it were lighting up Twitter, with people from every corner of the internet weighing in. Some thought Kenji, no, Tyrone, was making an interesting point about racial identity. Others saw him as nothing more than a delusional attention seeker trying to cosplay as black for clout. The air buzzed with anticipation as Judge Marvin Calloway entered, adjusting his robe as he sat down. He did not look amused. Kenji sat at the plaintiff's table, grinning, bouncing his shoulders to an imaginary beat, fully convinced that he had already won the case in the court of public opinion. His lawyer, Brian Chambers, looked exhausted, as if he had spent the entire night questioning his life choices. Meanwhile, Angela Whitaker, the defense attorney, sat confidently, a smug smirk playing on her lips. She had done her research overnight, and today, Kenji was in for a reality check. Judge Calloway wasted no time. He folded his hands and stared directly at Kenji. "Mr. Takahashi, excuse me, Mr. Jackson, before we proceed, I'd like to ask you a simple question. What does being black mean to you?" Kenji perked up, thrilled at the opportunity to make another speech. "Being black is more than just skin color, Your Honor. It's a mindset. It's about culture, rhythm, soul. It's about struggle and overcoming adversity." He leaned forward, locking eyes with the judge. "I might not have been born black, but I've felt black my whole life. From the way I talk to the way I walk, I embody the essence of blackness." Judge Calloway blinked slowly, then exhaled. "Mr. Jackson, tell me, have you ever been followed in a store for no reason?" Kenji hesitated, caught off guard. Well, no. But that's just because I don't steal, Your Honor." The courtroom gasped. Angela Whitaker's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly left her forehead. One of the black jurors shook her head in disbelief. Judge Calloway's jaw tightened. "Mr. Jackson, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. Let me rephrase. Have you ever been denied a job because of your name?" Kenji grinned. "Actually, no. But that's because I changed my name to Tyrone Jackson. And guess what? I applied for a job last year and they called me in for an interview thinking I was black. That just proves my point. People already see me as black, so why shouldn't the law recognize it?" The entire courtroom went dead silent. Angela clapped a hand over her mouth, trying to stifle her laughter. Judge Calloway simply stared at Kenji, as if he were staring into the void itself. After a long pause, he rubbed his temples and sighed. "Let me get this straight. You think the fact that you deceived an employer into thinking you were black supports your case for being legally recognized as black?" Kenji nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. If society already perceives me as black, then what's stopping the law from catching up?" Judge Calloway leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Jackson, have you ever been pulled over for simply driving through a nice neighborhood?" Kenji shook his head. "Nah, but that's because I drive normal. I don't do crazy stuff like—" "Enough," the judge interrupted, his voice sharp. "Have you ever had to fear for your life during a routine traffic stop?" Kenji paused, looking slightly uncomfortable. "No." Judge Calloway nodded. "Have you ever been denied housing because of the color of your skin?" "No." "Have you ever been judged as angry just for speaking with passion?" "No." "Have you ever been expected to represent your entire race in a workplace or academic setting?" "No." Judge Calloway narrowed his eyes. "Have you ever been racially profiled by the police?" Kenji shifted uncomfortably. "No." The judge leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Mr. Jackson, you claim to be black. But you have not experienced a single struggle that black people face on a daily basis." Kenji frowned. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I think you're gatekeeping blackness." The courtroom collectively lost it. People gasped, some burst into laughter, and others shook their heads in absolute disbelief. Even Angela Whitaker, usually composed, had to put a hand over her mouth to keep from openly cackling. Judge Calloway massaged his forehead. "Gatekeeping. Blackness." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Mr. Jackson, let me make something very clear to you. Blackness is not a trend. It is not a costume. It is not a club you can join because you like the music, the food, or the fashion. It is a lived experience, an experience shaped by history, systemic oppression, and generational struggle. And no matter how many do-rags you wear or how much hot sauce you put on your food, you will never know what it truly means to be black." Kenji crossed his arms, looking indignant. "So what you're saying is, blackness is just about oppression?" Judge Calloway raised a finger. "No, blackness is about resilience, culture, history, and identity. But that identity is shaped by real-life experience. It is not something you can simply adopt because it feels right." Kenji rolled his eyes. "I don't see the difference. If a white person can transition into a black person in 1955 by using a tanning bed and putting on a wig, why can't I?" Angela Whitaker snapped her folder shut. "Your Honor, I have no further questions. This man is clearly beyond reasoning." Judge Calloway exhaled slowly. "We will hear from the expert witnesses next. I am sure their testimony will be enlightening." He gave Kenji one last unreadable look before banging his gavel. As the courtroom adjourned, Kenji walked out with his head high, still convinced that he was on the right side of history. Meanwhile, The rest of the world watched in stunned disbelief, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The next session of the trial was met with even more media attention than before. News stations had set up outside the courthouse, social media was ablaze with debates, and Kenji, or rather, Tyrone Jackson, had become a household name. Some online users saw him as a performance artist, a walking meme who had taken identity politics to its most absurd extreme. Others, particularly within academic circles, saw this case as a potentially dangerous precedent, a legal battle that could either reinforce racial boundaries or blur them beyond recognition. Meanwhile, Kenji himself had become drunk on his own notoriety. He entered the courthouse with a new outfit, an "I am black" t-shirt, sagging jeans, and Timberlands, greeting reporters with exaggerated handshakes and fist bumps. Inside, the court was ready to bring in expert witnesses. The first to take the stand was Dr. Elaine Foster, a leading scholar in race and identity studies. A black woman in her 50s, she adjusted her glasses and sighed deeply as she was sworn in. She had spent her entire academic career researching racial constructs, identity formation, and systemic racism. The idea of debating a man who thought he could transition into blackness was, frankly, insulting. But she had been called to testify, and she intended to do so with brutal clarity. Angela Whitaker, the defense attorney, stood up and approached the witness stand. Dr. Foster, in your professional opinion, is racial identity something that can be chosen or changed at will? Dr. Foster tilted her head slightly, as if debating whether this was a real question. No, she said firmly. Race is a social construct, yes, but it is one that is imposed by society based on ancestry, historical context, and lived experience. It is not something an individual can simply declare themselves into. Angela nodded. And in the case of Mr. Takahashi, excuse me, Mr. Jackson, does his claim to black identity have any legitimacy from an academic standpoint? Dr. Foster let out a small chuckle. Absolutely not. She turned toward Kenji, giving him the kind of look a mother gives a child who has just said something profoundly stupid. Mr. Jackson's argument rests entirely on his personal preference. He claims to identify with black culture, but culture is not race. Liking rap music, wearing urban fashion, or eating soul food does not make one black. That's cultural appreciation at best, appropriation at worst. Kenji shifted in his seat, clearly annoyed. I'm not appropriating, though, he interjected, raising a hand as if he were in a classroom. I actually live this life. I got waves, I got a black name, Dr. Foster held up a hand to stop him. And that, Mr. Jackson, is precisely the problem. She turned back to Angela. Black identity is not a costume. It is not a set of behaviors one can adopt at will. It is a lived experience, shaped by systemic oppression, historical struggles, and racial perception. Mr. Jackson has not lived as a black man. He has lived as an Asian man who wants to perform blackness. The courtroom murmured in agreement. One of the jurors, a black man in his 40s, nodded along with everything Dr. Foster was saying. Kenji, however, was not backing down. What about transracial people? He blurted out. People like Rachel Dolezal? If a person can transition genders, why can't they transition races? Dr. Foster sighed again, deeper this time. Because gender identity and racial identity function differently. Gender is tied to biology, but it is also deeply personal and has been acknowledged as fluid across cultures. Race, on the other hand, is a social category that has been constructed specifically to create hierarchies of power and oppression. White supremacy, slavery, segregation, all of these things shaped racial categories in a way that is vastly different from gender. Kenji rolled his eyes. Okay, but you just said race is a social construct. So if it's just an idea, then why can't I identify however I want? Dr. Foster folded her hands and stared at him. Mr. Jackson, money is also a social construct. But if you walk into a bank and tell them you identify as a billionaire, they will laugh in your face. Just because something is socially constructed does not mean it lacks real-world consequences. The entire courtroom erupted into laughter. Even Judge Calloway, who had been maintaining his composure, let out a low chuckle. Angela Whitaker hid a smirk behind her hand. Kenji, however, looked furious. So you're telling me I have to suffer oppression to be black? He snapped. That's messed up. Dr. Foster nodded. Yes, it is messed up. But that is the reality of being black in America. Kenji slumped back into his seat, arms crossed. He muttered something under his breath, but the damage was done. His argument had been completely dismantled. Next, the court brought in a geneticist. Dr. Anthony Chong, an Asian American expert in genetics, was called to the stand to testify about racial ancestry. He presented Kenji's DNA results, which had been submitted as evidence. Angela stood up. Dr. Chong, can you confirm Mr. Jackson's ancestry? Dr. Chong nodded. Yes. Mr. Jackson's DNA test shows that he is 100% East Asian, with no trace of African ancestry. Angela turned to Kenji. Mr. Jackson, do you have any response? Kenji shrugged. I don't see why that matters. Race is about more than just genetics. Dr. Chong adjusted his glasses. Race is a social construct, yes. But it is one that is deeply rooted in ancestry. If race were purely a choice, we would have seen historical cases of enslaved black people identifying as white to escape slavery. But that never happened, because racial identity is imposed by society. Kenji groaned, rubbing his face. He was losing ground fast. Judge Calloway finally spoke up. We've heard from the experts. We've seen the evidence. At this point, Mr. Jackson, your claim is based on nothing more than personal preference. Kenji gritted his teeth. So that's it? You're just gonna say I'm wrong? That's racism against me. Angela sighed. Mr. Jackson, you are not the victim of racism. You are the victim of your own delusion. The courtroom burst into whispers and murmurs. The case was slipping out of Kenji's hands, and he knew it. But he wasn't done yet. He still had one last trick up his sleeve. Tomorrow, he would make his most desperate attempt yet, to prove his blackness through performance. The next morning, the atmosphere inside the courtroom was electric. The case had gone viral overnight, dominating news channels, late-night talk shows, and social media debates. Kenji Takahashi, now infamously known as Tyrone Jackson, had become a global spectacle. Some called him a performance artist, others saw him as a delusional grifter, and a few even viewed him as a martyr for racial fluidity. But today, with the case rapidly slipping through his fingers, Kenji knew he had to pull out all the stops. He had one last chance to prove to the world, and more importantly, to the court, that he was truly black. Kenji stormed into the courtroom with newfound confidence, dressed in an all-black tracksuit, gold chains around his neck, and a pair of Air Jordans. His lawyer, Brian Chambers, looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. The man had clearly given up, but Kenji? Kenji was ready. Judge Calloway took his seat, adjusting his robe. He looked tired. He had spent his entire legal career dealing with serious cases. Murder trials, corruption scandals, organized crime. But today, he was presiding over a man who thought wearing a do-rag and eating collard greens made him black. Angela Whitaker, the defense attorney, stood up, flipping through her notes. Your Honor, after yesterday's expert testimony, it is clear that Mr. Jackson's claim is completely unfounded. He has no genetic connection to the black community, no lived experience of black oppression, and... Objection! Kenji suddenly shouted, slamming his hands on the table. Judge Calloway pinched the bridge of his nose. Mr. Jackson, this is not a TV drama. You don't get to just yell, objection, whenever you feel like it. Kenji stood up anyway, adjusting his gold chains. Your Honor, I understand that you and Ms. Whitaker don't believe me, but I have definitive proof that I am black. Angela raised an eyebrow. Oh, this should be good. Kenji turned to the judge and dramatically pulled out a laminated card from his pocket. This, he declared, holding it up for everyone to see, is my black card. The courtroom went silent. Judge Calloway squinted. Your what? Kenji proudly held up the card. My official black card. It's signed by my homie Jamal, who is a real black man, by the way. He told me I was cool enough to be black. So legally, that should count. A loud groan erupted from the black spectators. One elderly black man in the back removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. A younger woman, who had been live-streaming the trial, whispered into her phone, "Ain't no way this man just pulled out a black card in a court of law." Angela stared at Kenji as if he had just grown a second head. "Let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You think that a laminated black card, which you got from a random friend, qualifies you to be legally recognized as black?" Kenji nodded enthusiastically. "Not just any friend. Jamal has 100% African ancestry. If a black man recognizes me as black, how can you argue against that?" Judge Calloway took off his glasses and sighed. "Mr. Jackson, that is not how race works." Kenji crossed his arms. "Well, that's just your opinion." Angela could barely contain her laughter. "That is literally how race works, Mr. Jackson." But Kenji wasn't done. He had one more desperate move. He walked to the center of the courtroom, cleared his throat, and raised a microphone. "If I'm not black, then explain this." And then, to the absolute horror of everyone in the room, Kenji started rapping. "Yo, my name is Tyrone, I ain't in no zone. I spit these bars, man, off the dome. The judge don't know me, he think I'm fake. But I'm black in my heart, let's get this cake." The entire courtroom went dead silent. Nobody clapped. Nobody moved. Judge Calloway's eyes twitched. Angela Whitaker's mouth was slightly open in pure disbelief. Brian Chambers, Kenji's own lawyer, had buried his face in his hands. Kenji, however, stood there, proud of himself. "See? Who else could spit bars like that? If I wasn't black, could I rap like this?" Angela slowly turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I have no words." Judge Calloway rubbed his forehead. "Mr. Jackson, that was quite possibly the worst thing I have ever heard in my courtroom. And I once had to listen to a man defend himself by claiming he was too high to commit a crime." Kenji threw his hands in the air. "Y'all are just haters. You're mad because I'm proving my case. If a white person can transition to another gender, then I should be able to transition to another race." Angela slammed her folder shut. "Mr. Jackson, you are not a victim. You are a delusional man who has taken identity politics and twisted it into a circus act." Kenji gritted his teeth. "So you're saying I'll never be black, no matter what I do?" Judge Calloway took a deep breath. "That is exactly what I'm saying." Kenji fell silent. His eyes darted around the room, looking for any support. The black spectators looked disgusted. The jury looked exhausted. His own lawyer looked ready to quit his job. And for the first time, Kenji looked unsure. The reality was setting in. This was it. He was about to lose. The courtroom was dead silent. The weight of reality had finally settled on Kenji's shoulders, and for the first time since the trial began, he was out of arguments. He stood there, still clutching his laminated, black card, his gold chains now feeling heavier than before. The same confidence he had walked in with had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but an awkward silence. Judge Calloway, who had spent decades overseeing legal proceedings, had witnessed many absurd cases in his career. But this was something else. He had given Kenji every opportunity to explain himself, to provide real evidence of his claim, and yet, all Kenji had managed to do was turn a courtroom into an SNL skit. Enough was enough. The judge exhaled slowly, removing his glasses and placing them on the bench in front of him. He looked at Kenji for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Jackson, let me make something very clear to you." Kenji shifted in place, bracing himself. "This is a court of law, not a social experiment." Kenji gritted his teeth. "So you're just going to deny my identity?" Judge Calloway shook his head. "No, Mr. Jackson. I am going to deny your delusion." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. The judge continued. "You have argued that race is fluid, that it is something one can simply choose, like a new wardrobe or a favorite music genre. You have claimed that your experiences, listening to hip-hop, wearing urban fashion, changing your name, somehow erased the reality of your ancestry, your history, and your lived experience as an Asian man. Kenji opened his mouth to interject, but the judge held up a hand. No. You've had your turn to speak. Now it's my turn. Kenji froze. Judge Calloway leaned forward slightly, his tone colder now. You have not suffered the consequences of blackness. You have not faced racial profiling, economic discrimination, systemic prejudice, or historical oppression. You have not been targeted because of your skin color. You have not had opportunities stripped from you due to racial bias. You do not carry the generational weight of slavery, segregation, or institutional racism. What you have done, Mr. Jackson, is play dress-up. Kenji scoffed. That's not fair. Fair. Judge Calloway's voice was sharp. You want to talk about fair? How fair is it that black people, real black people, have spent centuries fighting for recognition, for equality, for basic human dignity, only for someone like you to come along and treat their identity like it's a Halloween costume? Kenji tensed. The judge continued. You have turned this courtroom into a spectacle, wasted taxpayer money, and insulted the very people you claim to identify with. And now, you have the audacity to sit here and tell me it's unfair. Angela Whitaker was watching the judge with a look of sheer admiration. Kenji, however, was squirming in place. For the first time, he had no comeback. No rap verse. No black card. Just silence. Judge Calloway picked up his gavel, but before delivering the final verdict, he asked one last question. Mr. Jackson, let me ask you this. If tomorrow, identifying as black suddenly came with no cultural influence, no hip-hop, no fashion, no slang, no social benefits, would you still want to be black? Kenji froze. His mind raced. Without the music, the culture, the style, would he still feel the same? Would he? Kenji looked down at the floor. He didn't answer. The judge nodded. That's what I thought. He raised the gavel. The court finds no legal or rational basis for Mr. Jackson's claim to black identity. His request for racial reclassification is denied. Bang. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom. It was over. The room erupted into reactions. Some people clapped, others shook their heads. The black attendees nodded in approval, while a few reporters whispered excitedly into their microphones. Angela Whitaker closed her folder with a satisfied smirk. Brian Chambers, Kenji's lawyer, simply stood up and walked away without a word. He had done his job, and he was done with this mess. Kenji, however, stood frozen, his face a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment. He had been so sure he would win, that the world would see his side, that he would walk out a symbol of racial freedom. But instead, he had been publicly humiliated. A few reporters rushed toward him as he exited the courtroom. Mr. Jackson, what do you have to say about the ruling? Kenji gritted his teeth. This court is racist. Do you plan to appeal? Kenji adjusted his chains. You're damn right I do. This fight isn't over. But deep down, he knew it was. As he walked outside, the crowd that had gathered began laughing at him. His face burned with shame. The memes were already flooding the internet. His entire case had become a joke. And for the first time, Kenji Takahashi, Tyrone Jackson, finally understood something. No matter how much he talked, dressed, or acted black, he would never be black. And the world would never let him forget it.